Over the last century, the way we support adults with disabilities in British Columbia has gone through a massive overhaul. But has it really changed in the ways that matter most? Let's take a look at this journey to see what's different, what's better, and what might just be an old problem in a brand new package.
Okay, to really get a handle on this, let's follow one person. Just picture an adult with a significant disability living somewhere in BC today. Now rewind the clock 100 years. Where would that exact same person actually live?
Well, 100 years ago, the answer was simple and pretty stark: a locked institution. The jump from that one isolating option to all the community choices we have today, well, it looks like a total revolution. But as you can probably guess, the story is way more complicated than that. All right, let's step back in time. In the early 20th century, pretty much all support was built around these huge institutions. And the unspoken rule really was that it was better to keep people hidden than to actually support them out in the open. And you gotta understand, these places, like the famous Woodland School, they weren't just one thing. They were a person's entire universe: their school, their hospital, their home, all wrapped up in one building. Who you were as a person didn't matter nearly as much as the label the system slapped on you. And this is really the heart of the matter. The goal wasn't to help someone build a meaningful life. The goal was basically storage and management. The reality was, well, it was often awful. Overcrowded wards, shared clothes, forget about personal space or dignity. But things couldn't stay that way forever. Right around the middle of the century, you start to see the first cracks in that old system. And a lot of that pressure came from families who just weren't willing to be quiet anymore. It was kind of like a perfect storm. You had the rise of human rights movements, which was huge. At the same time, families started banding together, forming these really powerful advocacy groups. And then the media started to pull back the curtain and expose the terrible abuse and neglect that was happening inside these places. You see, for years, families were sold this idea that an institution was the best, safest place, that their loved ones were with experts. But what many eventually found out, the reality, was something else entirely. We're talking about conditions that today we'd call cruel and just inhuman. And so, ever so slowly, the conversation started to change. It wasn't about hiding them away so it's quiet anymore. The new buzzword was inclusion. Include them in regular schools, in the community, in just ordinary life. But making that word a reality, well, that was going to be a very, very long road. So this whole process of closing the institutions, it didn't happen overnight. It really kicked off in the 70s as the big places started to downsize. Then in the 80s, you see group homes popping up everywhere. And by the 90s, the big institutions like Woodlands were finally closing their doors for good. Now, the government didn't just walk away. They just shifted their job from running one giant building to funding and managing this whole new network of smaller places.
And that brings us to what we call community living. But here's the thing. Just because you close the old buildings doesn't mean you've solved all the old problems. In fact, it created a whole bunch of new ones. For a long time, the group home was the go-to model. And on the plus side, it was a huge step up. People were living in actual houses, on normal streets, with more freedom. But on the flip side, you had real issues. Staff were getting paid very little, which led to constant burnout and turnover. And maybe most importantly, that old habit of making decisions for people instead of with them, that didn't go away. So, with some of the challenges of the group home model, another idea started to really take hold: home sharing. The easiest way to think about it is like adult foster care. A person with a disability moves in and lives with a paid caregiver, right in their family home.
And I really have to stress, this is not just about renting out a spare bedroom. It's becoming part of a family. You're there for the holidays, the good times, the bad times, all of it. And on top of that, you're providing professional, often 24/7 care. It's a massive, massive commitment. And today, it's a huge part of the system here in BC. Okay, so the homes changed, but something else changed too. The whole system of who's in charge. The old top-down structure of the institution was gone, and this new, much more complicated chain of command took its place. And that begs the question, when something goes wrong, who's actually accountable? Just look at this chain. It's a lot. You've got the government ministry at the top, handing money to a provincial agency. That agency then contracts out to smaller local agencies. Those agencies find and manage the frontline staff. And way down at the bottom of this long chain, that's where you find the individual and their family. And here's the problem. On paper, it looks more professional, right? But in reality, accountability gets really blurry. It becomes incredibly easy for everyone to just point fingers up and down the chain. Finding the person who says the buck stops here, that gets really, really tough. And we're not talking about a small amount of money here. Today, the annual budget for all of this is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So from a bird's eye view, it seems like we've got a modern, well-funded system in place. But then you start digging. You look at official reports, coroner's inquests, and some really uncomfortable patterns keep showing up. There's chronic underfunding for the people doing the actual day-to-day care. There's incredible burnout. And tragically, there are these huge gaps in oversight where terrible things can happen before anyone in charge even realizes there's a problem. So you have to ask yourself, what have we really built here? Is it truly a system that offers freedom and support? Or did we just tear down the old walls and build a complicated new maze in its place? Which brings us all the way back to the beginning. Let's forget the bureaucracy for a second and go back to that one person we imagined at the start. For them, for one human life, what has really changed? All right, let's put it side by side. Location, for sure, that's changed. From an isolated building to a house in a neighborhood. Big win. Freedoms, yep, more choice, more opportunity, also a big win. But what about vulnerability? The risk of neglect, of falling through the cracks, that's still incredibly high. And accountability. Well, it used to be harsh, but at least it was clear. Now, it's just a tangled mess. So here's the final question we have to leave you with. Have we actually built a system that is fundamentally safe and respectful for the most vulnerable people in our communities? Or have we mostly just changed the scenery and allowed the same old problems to move inside new walls?